Keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridzuan diiringi dev-dev kenamaan. Hadirin dipersilakan duduk. Ampun Tuanku, menghadap Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridzuan, Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, Ibni Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah Al-Maghfur-Lah. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik dengan penuh hormat dan takzimnya merafak sembah, menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih di atas limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berjemaah duli berangkat ke Majlis The Royal Book Launch of Islam and Biomedicine. Sesungguhnya, keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku amat dinanti-nantikan dan sudah tentunya akan menjadi kenangan terindah kepada patik sekalian. Ampun Tuanku, patik merafak sembah memohon ampuni limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patik turut mengalu-alukan dev-dev kenamaan seterusnya meneruskan acara dalam bahasa Inggeris. Ampun Tuanku. The Right Honourable Menteri Besar of the State of Perak Darul Ridzuan, the Attorney General of Malaysia, Your Excellencies, the Ambassadors of the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Britain and Ireland, Your Eminences, the Muftis of the various states, and the archbishops from across Malaysia, members of the ulama, scholars, the medics and scientists in attendance, vice-chancellors and deans, as well as the heads of medical schools from all over Malaysia, heads of the various federal and Perak state government agencies, directors of corporate Malaysia, members of the al-Akiti family, our media partners, TV Al-Hijrah, Astro, and Radio IKIM, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning and a warm welcome to everyone. Ampun Tuanku. Before we begin today's Royal Book Launch, Patek would like to invite Mr. Isa Robert Martin, an American Muslim convert from New York City, who has been an English lecturer at numerous universities across the globe, including here at the International Islamic University, Malaysia, to recite verses 70 to 73 of Surah Al-Azhab and to provide a translation in English.
Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا. O believers, be mindful of God and speak words direct to the point. يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. And he will put your deeds right for you and forgive you your sins. Whoever obeys God and His Messenger will truly achieve a great triumph. إنا أردنا الأمانة على السماوات والأرض والجبال فأبين أن يحملنها وأشفقن منها وحملها الإنسان إنه كان ظلوما جهولا. We offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains, yet they refused to undertake it and were afraid of it. Mankind undertook it. They are always prone to error and are always rash. ليعذب الله المنافقين والمنافقات والمشركين والمشركات ويتوب الله على المؤمنين والمؤمنات وكان الله غفورا رحيما. God will punish the hypocrites and the unbelievers, both men and women, and turn with mercy to the believers, both men and women. God is most forgiving, most merciful. Sadaqallahul Azim. God Almighty speaks the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Isa Robert Martin, for the simple and elegant recitation, as well as the translation of verses of the Holy Quran.
Setelah diri bertambah besar, di tempat kecil tak muat lagi. Setelah harga bertambah tinggi, orang pun segan datang menawar. Rumit beredar di tempat kecil, kerap bertemu kawan yang culas. laksana ombak di dalam gelas. Diri merasai bagai terpencil. Walaupun musnah harta dan benda, harga diri janganlah jatuh. Binaan pertama walaupun runtuh, kerja yang baru mulailah pula. Pahlawan budi tak pernah nganggur, khidmat hidup sambung bersambung. Kadang turun, kadang membumbung, sampai istirahat di liang kubur. Masih panjang lagi karangan ni. Pastinya aku akan menulis dan terus menulis lagi.
A short reel depicting art imitating life. Dedication shown by Dato Afifi to the task at hand, a task which fruits we shall all bear witness to shortly. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Ampun Tuanku, it is with great pleasure for Patik to cordially invite Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Samsudin bin Osman, the President of the International Islamic University Malaysia, to deliver the welcoming remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi washabbihi ajmain. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Menghadap kepada Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak, Sultan Nazrin, Muizzuddin Shah, Ibni Almarhum, Sultan Azlan, Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfur-Lah. Ampun tuanku, beribu ampun, sembah Patik, mohon ampun. Terlebih dahulu, Patik dengan penuh hormat dan takzimnya merafak sembah menjunjung tinggi kasih di atas limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak sudi berangkat mencemaduli ke ISTAC IIUM bagi menyempurnakan majlis pelancaran buku Islam and Biomedicine. Sesungguhnya keberangkatan tuanku memberi arti yang besar kepada kami dan menambah serikan lagi majlis ini. Ampun tuanku, dengan penuh hormat dan takzimnya, Patik mohon limpah perkenan Duli tuanku untuk Patik turut mengalu-alukan tetamu kehormat serta hadirin yang hadir. The Right Honourable Dato Sri Sarani bin Muhammad, Perak Menteri Besar, Yang Tamat Mulia Raja Dato Sri Ibni bin Almarhum Sultan Azlan, Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfur-Lah, the Right Honourable Tan Sri Dato Sri Idrus Harun, Attorney General of Malaysia, Honourable Heads of the Federal and Perak State Agencies, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners, Honourable Dato Dr Afifi al-Akiti, Fellow Centre for Islamic Studies, Oxford University, Your Eminences, State Muftis and Archbishops, honorable and distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the International Islamic University of Malaysia, I'd like to welcome all of you to the Royal Book launch this morning. The book being launched is a result of a collaborative project led by the Malaysian theologian based at the University of Oxford, Dato Dr Afifi, al-Akiti, who partnered with a medical doctor from Chicago University in the United States. Our special welcome is reserved for His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin, Muizzuddin Shah, Al-Marhum, Sultan Azlan, Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfur-Lah, the Sultan of Perak, the Ridzuan, who has graciously consented to launch the amazing book. IIUM is extremely delighted to have the presence of His Royal Highness in ISTAC today to celebrate this auspicious occasion. This is indeed a historic event for IIUM, since this is the first time ever that His Royal Highness has set foot in ISTAC. The new ISTAC building, that is, as I have it on good authority that His Royal Highness had visited the old ISTAC building in Damansara, which is no less a magnificent palace than this one, although a smaller one. We are also very pleased to welcome Tuanku to visit Muhammad Najib Al-Atta's library house here in ISTAC, following the end of the Royal Book launch. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we at IIUM wish to congratulate Dato Afifi and all the scholars who were involved in this book project, including proudly one of our own, namely Emeritus Professor Dato Osman Bakar, holder of the prestigious Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal here at ISTAC IIUM. Titled Islam and Biomedicine, the book focuses on the intersection between the Islamic theology as well as ethical tradition and modern biomedicine in both Islamic and modern Western civilizations. The book addresses issues that are of great interest, especially to theologians and philosophers, scholars and ulama in medical jurisprudence, and medical and health practitioners. And the public and policymakers all over will no doubt benefit from the book as well, as it is accessible and well written. IIUM is proud to be part of this significant event. Our Kuala of Medicine in Kuantan campus is one of the joint organizers of the International Symposium on Islam and Biomedicine that is part of the Royal Book launch, which will continue to the end of the day today. The other joint organizers are Faculty of Medicine from the University of Malaysia, University of Kuala Lumpur, Royal College of Medicine, Perak, and of course, alongside the University of Oxford, whose illustrious scholars are with us here today. We wish a great success to both the Royal Book launch this morning and the International Symposium on Islam and Biomedicine this afternoon. On behalf of IIUM, I would like once again to express our sincere appreciation of the honor given to us to host the Royal Book launch and the International Symposium to be officiated by His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah. Ampun tuanku, ibu ampun, sembah patih, mohon diampun. Sekian saja persembahan ucapan patih. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri President, for delivering those warm words of welcome. Ampun tuanku. Patih would like to now invite Yang Berbahagia, Dato Dr Afifi al-Akiti, to humbly invite His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, the Sultan of the State of Perak, Darul Ridzuan, to deliver the royal address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you today to celebrate the launch of Islam and Biomedicine, edited by Malaysia's own Oxford Muslim theologian, Dato Dr Afifi al-Akiti, in collaboration with Dr. Padella from the University of Chicago. This remarkable collection of 13 essays in the world-famous Philosophy and Medicine series is a masterclass in interdisciplinary scholarship, bringing together the discourses of science, medicine, theology, and philosophy. These essays demonstrate the richness and the new perspectives that can be achieved by placing these diverse disciplines and world-renowned scholars in conversation. This book is the result of a major scholarly project supported by the Templeton Religious Trust, an organization renowned for its support of the world's greatest minds, with over $1.8 billion of funding given since 1984. Its founder, the contrarian investor John Templeton, believed in advancing humanity's understanding of the profound questions in life. This particular project brings together some of the world's top Muslim theologians, medics, and intellectual historians. It represents a serious and original attempt to integrate religious, moral, and epistemic frameworks and provides a holistic approach to the bridging of two very different bodies of knowledge, namely Islam, an ancient religion, and biomedicine, a modern science. The titles of the book's 3 sections are indicative of its impressive breadth and erudition. We begin with a historical perspective, looking at early Islamic contributions to medical knowledge in the first section, entitled From Greek to Islamic Conceptions of Health and Biomedicine. In its middle section, The Meaning of Life and Death, the collection brings Islamic and medical understandings together in a wide-ranging existential exploration. And in its final section, Interfacing Biomedical Knowledge and Islamic Theology, the book focuses on the intersection between Islamic law and modern science, illuminating areas of conversion and divergence. Across these 3 sections, it is no exaggeration to say that Islam and biomedicine explores some of the most fundamental questions facing humankind. What does it mean to be human? When does life begin and end? What roles are played by choice, compassion, and faith within the modern sphere of biomedicine? These are questions which matter to all of us, but which we often push to the back of our minds, either because they are too large, too philosophical, or difficult to grapple with, or because we are simply too preoccupied with more immediate concerns. I would like to commend Dato Dr Afifi for his vision in pursuing these deep and important issues, and want to congratulate every one of his collaborators for their deft, sensitive, and illuminating handling of their subject matter. In their introduction to this volume, the editors write that their aim is to draw sustained attention to the intersection of Islam and biomedicine, to seek ways in which these two seemingly opposite sources of knowledge, rationality versus revelation, can and indeed must work in harmony for the good of humankind. The collection seeks to and finds areas of complementarity, ways in which the two discourses, science and religion, can contribute to and learn from one another. This unusual endeavor of bringing ethics, Islamic theology, medicine and science into the same conversation feels extraordinarily timely for a number of reasons. Though the COVID-19 pandemic began over 3 years ago and is now no longer a global health emergency, the medical, emotional, and societal repercussions continue to be felt the world over. It was a crisis of unprecedented scale, and one for which biomedical scientists, health professionals, and governments, initially at least, appeared ill-equipped. The world did mobilize, of course, with lockdowns and travel restrictions imposed to limit the spread of the disease, and vaccines developed at record speed. Indeed, we are very fortunate that Professor Tess Lam, who helped design the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, has traveled from Oxford to be with us this morning to celebrate the launch of this book. Thank you, Professor. But the need to react so rapidly in the face of crisis left little space to consider the deeper psychological and ethical implications of such an event. Such as, for instance, how to balance an immediate medical threat to one vulnerable group with the potential longer-term mental health impact on another. Or to consider what room is left for individual agency when mass collective action is necessary to overcome a major health emergency. Or how to make decisions in circumstances where the more compassionate course of action may also be the one that potentially promotes the spread of a deadly disease. So while we might now be better prepared in logistical terms for future health emergencies, I do not believe our global community is yet fully capable of addressing fundamental ethical questions like these. And it is in areas such as this that the work and thinking presented in Islam and biomedicine can make such an important contribution. Here, we find essays on the tension between medical determinism and Islam's conception of the human as a free moral agent. We have explorations of holistic and atomistic approaches to human health and the different perspectives offered by each. And we have throughout a sustained interrogation of the question of what human life is and why it matters. These essays, in other words, model for us a way of thinking through difficult moral questions to which medicine, faith, and compassion may all give differing answers. The world needs much more of this thoughtful, collaborative, and ethical exploration if it is to prepare itself effectively for the global health challenges of the future. In its consideration of such fundamental questions about the nature of human life, Islam and biomedicine also intersects in significant ways with an even more recent and no less seismic development on the world stage. I am talking, of course, about the impressive advances made in generative artificial intelligence technology with the launch late last year of ChatGPT, along with similar highly advanced AI models. AI has rarely been out of the headlines since, with momentous advances it enables being welcomed and celebrated, especially in the medical field. In recent weeks alone, we have heard how AI can help match patients with more tailored and therefore effective treatments, how it can cut radiotherapy treatment times, and how it can speed up the discovery of new antibiotics for tackling superbugs. There is even talk of an AI-powered medical revolution with rapid, life-saving advances in diagnosis and treatment. But for every article celebrating the potential of AI to benefit humankind, there are others decrying its dangers. AI, it is feared, will displace huge numbers of jobs, sending shockwaves through the economy of a kind not seen since the first industrial revolution in the 19th century. Its extraordinary ability to generate text and images almost simultaneously poses a threat to creativity and how it is defined, raising challenging questions about intellectual property rights and the value of the human imagination. Many of the much heralded medical breakthroughs I have just mentioned are also not without their ethical complications, including, again, those concerning rights over data. And what happens when an AI gets it wrong? As we have seen play out in various sci-fi movies, such as the sentient supercomputer HAL in Sidney Kubrick's classic film 2001: A Space Odyssey, or even the hostile AI Skynet in James Cameron's box office hit The Terminator. At the heart of these fears around AI is a fundamental question about what is unique, what is valuable, and what is sacred about human consciousness. Across its 13 chapters, Islam and biomedicine considers this question again and again from a range of perspectives. And even beyond that, the book itself is the epitome of everything that AI cannot do. AI can do many things. It can diagnose, prescribe, generate content, collate knowledge, all at superhuman speeds according to the data sets and models on which it is trained. But it cannot reflect. It cannot, as our brilliant human medics and scientists do, look at the data and then make holistic judgments about the best course of action, taking into account a patient's physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Neither can it follow in the footsteps of our wise philosophers, our theologians, our ulama, whose work must often venture far beyond the realms of data. AI machines are not moral beings, able to comprehend ethical nuances and apply compassion to complex situations and decision-making. Only humans can do that. The Quran famously declares, as we heard from the beautiful recitation earlier, that even the mountains, the heavens and the earth refuse such a burden of trust. No wonder then that the Quran describes that indescribable uniqueness and mysterious quality of the human consciousness in this memorable passage, and I quote, "They ask you about the human soul, the ruh. Say, the soul is part of my Lord's secret. You have only been given a little knowledge," unquote. I see the book, Islam and Biomedicine, then, as a strong testament to humanity and to the unique contribution humans can and must still make, even as AI expands and accelerates in the years to come. Yet the book is also, I believe, a testament to something else, to something that involves not looking forward, but rather backwards, at the long symbiotic history that exists between Islam and medicine. For while this book is a model of how science and ethics can intersect in general, it is also more specifically a distillation of the way in which Islam and medicine can illuminate and work with one another. After all, Islam and medicine share a long and fruitfully intertwined history. Many of the core foundations upon which scientific and medical practices are still based originated with Muslim scientists, as this book reminds us. Medieval Islamic scholars introduced the concept of control groups in medical experiments, for example, building on the knowledge of the Greek counterparts. In the 9th century, the great Islamic physician Al-Razi published treatises that contributed to humanity's understanding of the then deadly diseases, smallpox and measles. Islamic scientists were the first to observe the efficacy of alcohol as an antiseptic. And in the 13th century, the Muslim physician, who was also a famous Islamic theologian, Ibn Nafis, described pulmonary circulation more than 300 years before William Harvey. Although it is the English Renaissance anatomist who is generally credited with its discovery. Perhaps most significantly, it was the work of medieval Muslim doctors and scientists that led to the development of hospitals as we recognize them today. In the 9th century, the first Islamic hospitals began admitting patients from all economic backgrounds, irrespective of sex, religion, or ethnicity, organizing patients into wards by gender and diagnosis. This core concept and structure underlies hospital systems around the world to this day. While Islam and biomedicine is interested in differences of opinion and working through contradictory ideas, therefore, its foundation is very much one of harmony. Islam and medicine, in so many ways, go and always have gone hand in hand. These early medieval Islamic hospitals were funded through Waqaf, the charitable endowment given by the rich, and Zakat, the charitable contribution for the poor and needy that is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The duty of care for one's fellow human is enshrined in the religion of Islam, just as it is enshrined in medical practice. For the well-known hadith tells us that the Prophet ﷺ said, and I quote, "God has not created an illness without also creating a cure for it," unquote. And the Quran categorically states that if anyone saves a life, it is as if he saves the lives of all mankind. The directive to care and to cure, this is at the heart of, amazingly, both Islam and medicine. I would like to commend all those involved in this book, once again, for contributing to a collection which is at once a brilliant and timely intervention in our modern world and the continuation of a long intellectual tradition. I am moreover proud to celebrate this project, initiated by Dato Dr Afifi, a world-renowned scholar in his own right, who has contributed so much to contemporary Islamic thought and scholarship, yet always grounded in his Malay Islamic roots. The world needs more collaborative and interdisciplinary efforts like this, and I hope this important book paves the way for future joint projects between the ulama, the religious scholars of Islam, and the modern scientists and medics. Indeed, I am pleased to see that many of Malaysia's deans and heads of medical schools are gathered in this magnificent hall, particularly as this morning's book launch opens the one-day international symposium on Islam and biomedicine, the first of its kind to be held in this country. My heartiest congratulations to Dato Dr Afifi and to all his collaborators from around the world, and it is with great pleasure that I officially launch Islam and biomedicine. Thank you.
Ampun Tuanku, Batik would like to request Your Royal Highness to kindly remain on stage for the book launch ceremony, please. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for an amazingly profound and thoughtful speech. Pathe, and I'm sure the audience were moved by Tuanku's every word. It was truly an elegant and dignified royal address which befits the occasion of proudly celebrating the achievements of one of Malaysia's most famous sons. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests, we now begin our special forum on Islam and Biomedicine. The Springer book, Islam and Biomedicine, initiates conversations at the crossroads between the rich and long-standing Islamic intellectual tradition and the modern but diverse disciplines of biomedicine. As we learnt from the royal address presented by His Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, Dato Afifi's pioneering collaborative project has brought together scholars from all over the world, from the west to the east, bringing together both the ulama and the medics in a multidisciplinary caravan to engage in one fundamental question: how might biomedical advancements today inform and work with the Islamic theological and legal traditions? Pathe would like to kindly invite Dato Dr Afifi al-Akiti, the man behind Islam and Biomedicine, who has also just recently been announced as being inducted into the Senior Fellowship at the Royal Al-Bayat Academy of Jordan by His Majesty, the King of Jordan. He has also been listed in the Muslim 500, the world's 500 most intelligent and influential Muslims. Pathe would like to invite Dr. Afifi to kindly join us on stage, and he will be taking his place alongside Professor Tess Lam, OBE, who designed the Oxford vaccine, which saved millions of lives over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, we're very lucky to have these two world-famous Oxford dons celebrating the royal launch of the book with us this morning. They will be engaging in a robust conversation, and ladies and gentlemen, we should also invite you to join us in this conversation momentarily. I shall now hand the floor to Dato Afifi to take charge of this conversation.
Thank you, Moderator, Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very great morning indeed. So this is not going to be a very long forum. It's interesting that, as the moderator mentioned, that this is a special forum. It will be indeed a very short one. And given that we are two Oxford dons here, Tess, we'd like to welcome you who've come all the way from, is it sunny or raining England at the moment?
Very, very grey.
Very, very grey. So I think Tess is actually quite fortunate to really...
I am. And I want to extend my thanks both to you and to His Royal Highness for inviting me here today. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you really for coming all the way here. The one who saved almost how many, 6 million lives or so, etc. I mean, billions lives actually.
It was a large team, but yes, it was about 6 million in 1 year.
Indeed, yeah. So I thought what would be quite interesting would be that here we are from Oxford, and in a setting where you actually have two scholars, there is a term that we use in Oxford called the tutorial. And I thought that we might share a tutorial here in the presence of our, in this magnificent hall there. And for those of you who might not know the tradition of the university, the tutorial system is something which, when you have two interlocutors, not so much debating, but really having a chat. And this is one of the beauties of actually studying at the University of Oxford. It's really when you actually have a chat with your tutor, with your sheikh, we say in the Muslim tradition. It's almost as if those young ones among us, when they watch Star Wars, they think of the Jedi Master and the Padawan. And that's the sort of relationship that is there when you actually have a tutorial. And I think if you're okay, Tess, we're going to have a short Oxford tutorial here.
It sounds wonderful.
a nice chat about really Islam and biomedicine, and just to show Malaysia how a tutorial basically is done. I mean,
Very happy to.
I mean, as probably one of the most eminent scientists in the world, who had been behind the greatest historical and medical emergencies, in fact, in the world, I think, you know, and all of us would remember possibly two events in your life. One is 9/11, I think, in the West. They remember the building falling down. But I think this is the other big event that we remember. But the only thing about the pandemic is that it didn't happen overnight. It was almost like a slow motion train accident about to happen. And I was just wondering then, given this, where were you and when were you actually, that moment that came to you that this is a pandemic knocking on our door, before even the World Health Organization and WHO and others maybe realized? I mean, perhaps as one of the eminent scientists, that you've had a sneak preview, and given that there are all these conspiracy theories out there, you never know whether, hopefully scientists are not the ones behind it in the first place.
So no, actually it comes back to something very close to my heart, and I think very close to most religions. It's family. And my brother was at the time living abroad, living near where the outbreak was occurring, the epicenter. So he was living in China, and I followed any outbreaks that occurred in that part of the world very avidly, because I knew my Irish mother would ask me what would happen to my brother. So it started very, very small for me, and it was a dry run for what we hoped wouldn't be a pandemic, but it was an exercise in how fast could we go if this happened. And with the increased familial interest and the vested interest in trying to keep a mother happy, I was fully on board before we even knew it would be an outbreak. And I must admit that at that time, I thought it would be flu. Everybody thought it would be flu. I think for many, many years, many governments had planned for a flu pandemic. And some of those learnings were great, and some I think we need to be better prepared next time. So it started very, very small. The vaccine, myself and Sarah Gilbert had a conversation, Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, but just Sarah to me, had a conversation in a corridor about should we go and should we go fast? And we thought we should. But it was very academic at that stage. It was very, two scientists trying to see how quickly they could make a vaccine. We were hopeful that we wouldn't need it, but we're very glad that we had prepared in those early months.
Right, so there wasn't really a moment when you really think that this is going to happen, not like 9/11 really is.
No, in science there are very few of those eureka moments. Scientists are on occasion very joyous individuals, but generally quite dour.
Right.
So we don't ever jump up from our seats shouting eureka. It's a long, hard slog, but when you get something as momentous as this happening, you really need to give it your all, and that's what we did.
And if I may ask, I mean, what made you want to be someone who actually work in the field of vaccines? I mean, it's not something that you actually think of, that you 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old child thinking I want to become someone who might save, couple of million lives in the world and so on and so forth. I mean, how do you end up becoming someone who actually is in this field at all?
It's a really good question. I was always one of those very geeky children who loved science. I also loved art. I loved creativity, and I followed what I loved. And I was very lucky that I had a family that supported me in following what I loved. And in doing so, I had a very interesting career in Oxford, but didn't see any impact with what I was doing. It was too academic. And vaccines at that stage were seen as a safety blanket, a safety net. They continue to save millions of lives through routine childhood immunizations, but nobody had heard about vaccines to the extent they have today before the pandemic. So I moved into a field which was generally considered almost a dead science, and I did that because I was interested in seeing a translation of my life's work to make an impact. And also, in my opinion, there isn't enough work or resources put into diseases of impact in low and middle income countries. And for those types of diseases and those types of medicines and vaccines, it's generally academics that will push those endeavors on because there isn't a large pharmaceutical interest in making those types of interventions.
Right, and I think going through the pandemic, most of us thought that this is not just the one vaccine, by the way. I mean, we think that this is the Oxford vaccine, but there is a host of many other ones. You know, you've got the Pfizer vaccine, for instance, the Moderna. There are even, I think, in Malaysia tests. I mean, I think the government here had worked with the Chinese vaccine, for instance. But what is it with the Oxford vaccine that makes it unique then? I mean, is it because it's the most expensive vaccine, or is it, you know, I mean, because some of us are quite skeptical about this. I mean, you guys do this just for the money, is it? Some say that.
Very good questions again, but I will start it by saying, back when the pandemic was at its height, there was a lot of news reporting about how it was a race between the manufacturers, and it was never that for us. It was a race against a virus, and the more vaccines we had that could get into arms and save lives was the best outcome. I'm often asked if I was disappointed we weren't first in demonstrating that we had a vaccine. Mm-hmm. I wasn't. I was happy that we could get a vaccine, and I was happy that vaccines could get into arms.
So this is like the vaccine race, not like the arms race.
No.
So you're not, you know, you're not worried about being there on the first line.
No, I'm worried about people being safe. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about when we started to see the pandemic unrolling, when we started to see the impact it could have, my first thought was for children, because when these diseases happen, they generally impact children and older adults really badly.
Right.
And as a mother of 2 young children back then and having older parents, those were the things that kept me awake. Those were the things that drove you into work every day, continuously working across a huge team. So it was never a race for me against another manufacturer. It was, simply put, a race against a virus. And we were very lucky that it didn't impact children as badly as other respiratory pathogens. I will, however, say I do like our vaccine, so I will say some of the things that I think are unique.
Okay.
It was made at a low cost point, and that meant that over 2/3 of the vaccine that we made went to low and middle income countries. And that is why we do it. That is why we're in science, and that is why we make these vaccines to have an impact in those types of countries. So I'm very, very proud of that.
So the Oxford vaccine, we should be proud of the fact that it has a social, economic element to it, that it is, can I say, is it the cheapest vaccine in the market?
I don't think it's the cheapest, but it's certainly supplied globally, and that was what we aimed for.
Right. Now, just before I turn over, because this is my turn for the tutorial, I'm asking all the questions, and then of course Tess will get her turn, and so I was really confused during the pandemic period, because there was also a period when some of us have to go for boosters, and then some of them don't need to go for boosters, and we got kind of you know, confused over this, and then some of us were on AstraZeneca, which is from Oxford, and some from Pfizer, and those of us, I think, from AstraZeneca, like myself, I don't know, some of us have to go through some demam or something, you know, a bit of fever or something like that. And apparently some of the other vaccines do not appear to have any side effects. So how does it really work? I mean, it's, is it too dangerous to have 2 different types of vaccines in this case? So.
No, not at all. I will start by saying, though, and I was frequently asked this during the pandemic, what vaccine should I get? And my answer to that was, get the vaccine that you can get in your arm to keep you alive. Listen to your health ministers, listen to your country. They are trying to do the best for you. Getting different vaccines has actually proven quite effective. Different vaccines have different side effects, very, 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 very rare side effects. and they cause, so our vaccine will cause you to feel like you have a cold or a flu for a couple of days typically. Other vaccines have different types of reactogenicity or side effects. And actually it's been shown by a number of different very eminent scholars and clinical trials that getting different types of vaccine modalities, mixing and matching, you've actually got a better outcome. So I would take whatever vaccine is offered to you to keep you alive.
Right, okay. Good advice, I think. Now, Your Highness, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, some of you might not know, by the way, but Tess actually has a brush with Malaysia, although you've really never been to Malaysia. In that years ago, maybe is it about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, there was an outbreak of a very local virus named after a state in Malaysia called the Nipah virus. I think it's somewhere from Negeri Sembilan or somewhere there. And in fact, you were the one who basically invented the Nipah vaccine. And so now finally, after all these years, you've come home to the country where her vaccine has helped to inoculate the people who, So how does it feel like to come now to, it's like coming back home, if I may to say, to see, I don't know whether you have enough time when you're here to see where Nipah is even. So that's a strange feeling, isn't it?
It feels absolutely wonderful. And again, I'm very grateful for being invited. I would say it's a large team working on all of these vaccines. No one person can do this on their own. And we in Oxford, a large group of us are dedicated to making vaccines against these types of diseases. And yes, Nipah is one of them. And Sarah and I have been working on that for many years, and Sarah is hoping to start clinical trials soon. So it's a very exciting program. Unfortunately, there are many other viruses out there but we continue to try and make vaccines and therapeutics so that we can help.
I hope this doesn't become true, but just my final question on this vaccine side is, could the Nipah virus become pandemic size one? Could it ever become?
I think we'll skip this question.
Oh.
No. So the WHO and a number of very eminent scholarly bodies and government bodies have made a list of viruses that they think might have pandemic potential. And Nipah is on that list. I actually think for Nipah, there will be some very good vaccines and therapeutics. I think if Nipah were to spread, we would be able to contain it and control it relatively easily. So there are viruses that keep me awake at night, but Nipah is lower down on the list.
Right, and since we have almost all of the deans and the heads of the medical schools gathered here in this hall, this is a unique occasion, Professor Glam. What would you advise the heads of our medical fraternity here in this country? They are the presidents of the Royal College of Surgeons equivalent here, and heads of medical schools. What is it that this country needs to do to put in place, whether infrastructure or otherwise, so that we are, tip-top and ready for the next pandemic whenever it might knock on our door?
So the first piece of advice I would give, and it's an easy piece of advice that everybody can do, is instill a love of learning. If you instill a love of learning of the people that are coming up through your education system, give them opportunities, you've got the next leaders there. For me, during the pandemic and past the pandemic, it's investing in people and places that will get us out of all of the trouble that we are currently in the 21st century. Without passionate people who will take on these challenges, and without cross-disciplinary thinking and approaches, we're not going to be able to solve them. So if we can invest in our young people so that they can take up the mantle for when you and I retire, that's, I think, the best advice I could give to any educator.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I think that's very, very good advice. Now, that's my part of the tutorial, and then I think I will now pass on to you for you to conduct your part of the tutorial for my subject. I think this is the wonderful interdisciplinary engagements, because I'm not a scientist, she's not a theologian, but we have to learn to communicate and dialogue in a language we both understand. at the very least, that's a very good reason why we need more collaborative projects. Tess, so over to you.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity. So when you were compiling this book and editing it, what was the single theme that you wanted to get across and communicate most effectively?
Well, Tess, I think the main motive behind this is really the fear that I sometimes have when I read one of the great Muslim scholars of the age, Imam al-Ghazali. He was a great, great scholar. Professor Dato of course, is the holder of the Ghazalian chair, and for those who do not know, Imam al-Ghazali actually is like the Thomas Aquinas of Islam, or the Maimonides of Islam. And again, for those who do not know, Thomas Aquinas was probably the most famous Christian theologian, and Maimonides is the most famous Jewish theologian. So when al-Ghazali is mentioned, Tess, he's like, everybody knows him. And if you don't know him, you just have to remember the year of his death. 1111. Such an easy, year to remember. But the thing about Al-Ghazali was that his main concern was not wanting to see, the Malays would say, melaga-lagakan antara agama dan sains. To see a conflict between religion and science. And I think that was probably one of, he was really well known, and known in the world, not just in the Muslim world, but he was known in the world as a great harmonizer. Someone who wants to bring peace to, as His Royal Highness said in his beautiful royal address, to how do we try and make sense of these two seemingly opposite bodies of knowledge, rationality versus revelation. Because when we say, and we talk about rationality, we are talking about our fitrah, which is coming from us. In Arabic, Tess, fitrah means really, common sense, natural, primordial. When we are born, that we have our intellects, for example, as Descartes would say, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So that's the sense of the fitrah. That's the sense of human beings, that we are created by God, and instilled, and somehow when God created us, we've somehow been programmed that we can think. So rationality really comes from us. On the other hand, religion is not something that is from us. And we sometimes don't think about this. And think about it. Religion means it is something from out of this world, not from us. It's something alien. So here, Al-Ghazali, in his most remarkable statements, one of his great philosophical maxims, if you like, he said that something like, rationality, our akal, is like a scripture. It's like our religion. So religion is a form of authority from within ourselves. So we must respect our akal, we must respect our common sense, we must respect the scientific tradition as a result. Al-akulu naklun min dakhilin, Imam al-Ghazali says. But then he turns it on its head. One naklu, and scripture or religion is like an intellect, aklun min kharij. It's like an intellect coming from out of our world. So here, Al-Ghazali was kind of teaching us that both two sources of knowledge, although they appear contradictory, they actually support one another. So that makes him a great harmonizer, and this is for this very reason. I have to say that Christians love him. Great Thomas Aquinas quotes him, and the late Pope John Paul II, in his famous encyclical Fides et Ratio, Faith and Reason, is partly based on this, that there is no real contradiction between science and religion. So now I thought that if the West really, loved this sort of thing, and I thought that sometimes people, and those of us in the East, might forget that actually this very idea that science and religion do not contradict themselves actually came from the East, you see. So that's the original intention why I, embarked on this project, because there is so much to do to make sure that we do not get our scientists and our religious scholars in a squabble. And I think it's important to really bring people together, and I think it's particularly important to show that, particularly in the field of medicine, this is something that is easily done, in fact.
No, I would agree, and I think both fields can learn from each other through open dialogue and having more conversations. And without those types of dialogue and those types of interventions, if you will, we're not going to progress in great leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
So what would be your greatest fear going forward? To see a splitting between science and theology, or would you worry that it's already happened?
Well, I think it has already happened. So in Oxford, as you know, we have scientists who are anti-religion. I will not ask which madhab you belong to, whether you're pro-religion or anti-religion. And there are those who are basically scientists who are even fundamentalists so. And make it a point that they say religion is the cause of all evils in the world, really. I mean, it's not so much as somebody else who may have been attributed to have said something like religion is the opium of the masses, for example. And I think this is where we want to try and reduce the temperature. It's very, very important. It has already happened. There are scientists out there who are very much against religion, and I'm sorry to say there are even perhaps religious scholars, and I can't speak on behalf of the Christians, but there may be even religious scholars on the Muslim side, for example, who may actually see science as antagonistic, for example. So, I mean, I remember, in fact, one of our colleagues in Oxford was the great Richard Dawkins. So, he's, a great scientist who worked on, the gene theory and so on and so forth. And this is in the University of Oxford, one of the famous universities in the world, definitely famous for teaching even secular subjects such as the sciences. And I remember when I was invited to New College, he was a fellow at New College, and he was the senior fellow presiding over the dinner there. And my friend, the economist Richard Mash, invited me there for dinner. Both our sons go to the same school at New College School, so I was invited then. And the tradition in Oxford is such that if you're the senior fellow, you actually have to recite what the Muslims call a dua, the grace. So we all know the reputation of Richard Dawkins, who's anti-religion and so forth, etc., etc. Yet, here in college, at the university, he ended up doing the dua, the grace, Benedictu, Benedictum. And people said, and I even heard him sing Amen. So I couldn't help myself, being the guest of the college then, I said, Richard, I thought you don't believe in God. And you know what he said to me? Dear, there's such a thing as tradition, Now, this is in a place like Oxford University. Even a great atheist fundamentalist, a great Richard Dawkins, respects tradition. And this is why it's interesting that, the university's motto is still Dominus Illuminatio Mea. The Lord is my light, from the book of Psalms. And for Muslims, the book of Psalms is one of the holy books of Islam. The book of Nabi Allah Daud alayhi salam, Kitab Zabur, in our Rukun Iman. It's an authority, alien authority from outside of this world. And the university, despite the fact that it has a very quote-unquote science, secular or worldly ideology and philosophy, but it has never forgotten its religious and traditional roots in this respect. It still displays proudly, basically, a verse from the Bible on its emblem. And so when I saw Richard Dawkins that way, I thought to myself, wow. This is a man who's actually grounded, Despite the reputation there, we thought, he really does respect tradition.
I would actually go slightly further and say that a lot of my colleagues that I work with are deeply religious, and they find a comfort. And I think when you're facing the kinds of challenges and pandemics and outbreaks that this world will continue to face, that people will need to turn to other sources of comfort and for solutions and resolutions. So I worry sometimes that we don't respect enough and we don't listen with actually open ears and hear what everybody at a table can bring and discusses. What do you worry about when we're having discourses like this around science and theology?
Well, there's an interesting irony here. In fact, a paradox, I would even say. I think in the 19th century, up until the time of Darwin, for example, before Darwin, Charles Darwin, of course, the famous, and founder of the evolutionary theory, physics, that science of physics, has always been considered to be a science, particularly after the time of Newton, to be quote-unquote anti-religion, because it broke away from an earlier paradigm called the Aristotelian paradigm. So it was in physics there are also, again, for the general audience who may not understand, we have madhabs even in physics, right? So we have schools of thought in different sciences. So in physics you had Aristotle, and then for more than 1,000 plus 2,000 years or so almost, then came Sir Isaac Newton in the 17th century. He basically came out with a new theory about motion, and he overturned the Aristotelian theory about physics. And from that point onward, really in the West, you've got the Enlightenment, people moving away from the old way of thinking. When they move away from the old way of thinking, they thought that when they became physicists, they are anti-religion in that sense, they're making the change. And biology at that point in time had always been the science that supports religion, interestingly enough. But by the time we reach Charles Darwin, and today I think the opposite is true. Today you will find among biologists are the ones that may have a reputation to be anti-religion, whereas physicists are those who have a reputation of trying to search for God, for example, trying to search for the mysteries of the universe, the anthropic cosmological principle, and so on and so forth there. So my fear test is this, that again, on both sides of the divide, the religious side we might have Christian or Muslim scholars who are suspicious of science because they think that science kills God. It's like Nietzsche said, somebody famous, of course, famous politician in 10 Downing Street said that, 10 Downing Street doesn't do God, right? God is Nick, that God is dead, for example. And I think this is the reason why a lot of the religious scholars, Muslims or Christians or any other religious, some of them may view science suspiciously because they think that endeavor might lead to knowledge that says that God does not exist or something. And we can see that in the history of science, the shift between physics and biology in that sense. And maybe today we don't know, even on the issue of evolution, for instance. It may even divide Muslims. It has already divided Christians. It is something that we will be, watching with great interest. So this is my fear. I think the fear is that, as Imam al-Ghazali taught us, the great Imam I mentioned earlier, and Thomas Aquinas in the Christian tradition, that actually the two spheres are in harmony. The contradictions that we see are only apparent contradictions. So it is up to the scientist and the theologian to try and separate what is objective truth from subjective truth so that they don't confuse the masses in this case. So my fear is precisely that we have misunderstanding from both sides of the divide, and that will have more repercussions, especially if the ulama, the religious scholars, for example, do not read about science. And I say this not jokingly, and for our, alhamdulillah, in this hall where we have in this hall gathered today, Tess, in this wonderful, this is almost unprecedented when we have a majlis or an event like this, where we have our muftis from all over Malaysia are here. There are at least 6 like bishops, Muslim bishops here, and also bishops from the Christian tradition gathered in the same room. And I say this, that we will have better fatwas, better Muslim legal opinions when the mufti reads around their subject. Meaning they don't only read about Sharia, but they read also The Economist, for example. That will make the world a better place. And similarly, if I may say so, for scientists like yourself, read around your subject, read beyond your subject, so that don't only read science, but read a bit, so where's the book, so a bit on religion as well. And so that's what I hope to remove that from the faith, because As Cicero said, dam non quod non intelligent. People condemn the things they don't understand.
I would agree, and I actually think there's an onus on people like you and I to continue to have these types of conversations, and for people in the audience to also have these conversations.
Well, thank you, Tess. And I think just to end, I think we're going to open this up a bit to the floor, I think. I mean, this is a tutorial, by the way. Technically, a tutorial is where you actually have two people having a conversation, and I hope all of you have seen how a tutorial works. I mean, it's really from the bottom of heart, and it's an open, frank conversation between two scholars, really. But now we're going to make it into a forum. So, where it is actually called a forum, and perhaps we'll ask if there's anybody in the audience that may have questions to Professor Tess, Lam, or myself. This is the opportunity to engage. I think there are mics on both sides of the aisle, and right, and the one who's holding the mic there, yep, okay. So let me see if there's anyone who wants to ask questions. This is the time for you to raise your hands. And, you know, we've got deans, you know, most of the deans from the medical school, and yes, I see someone raising a hand there. But it looks a very short hand. I'm here.
They're always the best questions.
Yes. Oh, this is someone I might know, actually. So I think you should introduce yourself. Yes.
I am Ramli al-Akiti, and I have a question for the Honourable Editor, Dato Dr Afifi al-Akiti. How would the Honourable Speaker say that the common people would be affected and impacted by this book? And furthermore, how would those who antagonize religion react to this book,
Okay.
if they were to stumble upon it?
I think for the disclosure of conflict of interest, that was my son, actually.
You always get the best questions from family or from younger people.
I think the Malaysians are a bit too shy to ask everything. So I mean, you should not call me honourable there. So just call Baba is fine. You can break protocol there. I've even forgotten the question. Well, so I don't want to say this is a very good question, but it's a tough question, really, because how would the common folk benefit from this book? Now, I first of all, I can think that they cannot, benefit other than the fact that I think we hope that the scholarly community can continue on with this caravan. This is the first caravan, where we've gathered scientists and the ulama. And this is the first, we hope, of many projects there. And I think the more of these sorts of projects happens, the better, because people in policy circles, for example, will benefit from this. And indeed, those who are essentially, as he put it, antagonistic over it. I think the adversaries out there, the so-called enemies out there. I mean, I'm reminded by what Imam al-Ghazali says, "An-nasu a'da'u ma jahilu," that people are enemies of what, again, they're ignorant of. So the book is really an attempt to try and open it up. But I'm sorry, Ramli, the book is not written for kids. And unfortunately, the great majority of people, with respect, kids, And we can't help it, because as scholars, we can only do what we can. But perhaps in this case, we can become better Imam al-Ghazalis, because he was very, very good at presenting his case to the public, at that public explanation and public programs, basically, for particularly the advancement of science there. Would you like to add anything, I think, on this?
No, I think it's a very good question, and my kids also ask me equally difficult questions, so I'm glad to see it's not just my family being difficult. Right. I think there is an onus on people like yourself and myself and making our subject matters accessible. Not always speaking in our mother tongues, not always speaking in scientific language, and going out there. And I remember giving talks to primary school children and secondary school children, and that's where we need to invest, I think, to help build a better dialogue and interaction going forward. And they always, always ask you the hardest questions.
Right, yeah. So, therefore, we parents are humbled by this, indeed, as always. So, let's take the next question there. Yes, there's a question there. Yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Razi Sapini. I'm a student here in ISTAC. I wish to address a question to both the speakers here. Regarding, and this might be a question also of ethics and responsibility. Yeah, how would you divide between the need to maintain the balance sheet, as in having profit, and social responsibility when it comes to medical discoveries, vaccine, whatever? That is basically my question. Because on the one side you have capitalists. Okay, we have done so much research, we need to make money out of this. But on the other hand, medicine first came as a social responsibility of a state or ruler, whatever it is, and they must provide medical care. So how do you balance that? Assalamu alaikum.
Salam, thank you. Interesting. I think you should
I'm
deal
sorry, I
with
didn't
this
quite
one.
catch.
So basically, how do we balance the profits, the bottom line of, of the company? In this case, if you think of Pfizer, I think in that context, with one social responsibility test, and particularly given scientists like yourself, being associated with big mega pharma companies like AstraZeneca, for example, and the Pfizers of the world. But how do we balance our social responsibility with profit making, really?
That's a very tough question now that I've understood it. And I would have to say that I can't speak for large pharmaceutical companies. I can speak for myself. And I continue to try and make vaccines that will be accessible and that will get to people in low and middle income countries. I do think that for some of these companies there was an awfully lot of money made during what was a humanitarian crisis. That's not something that I think we should invest in going forward. It's not the best approach, but yeah.
So for my part, I will say that this is really the role of where the religion can come in quite, beautifully, if I may say that, because particularly in the Muslim tradition, there is an obligation for, big companies, for example, to pay alms, for zakat, for example. So especially if they've made a killing on all those profits, so at least, a percentage of that will go back to the poor is something that is expected. So I know in the West it's slightly different, where corporate social responsibility is not an obligation in the sense that, but people actually do it. Over here, interestingly, it is an obligation, but people don't do it. You see, that's the irony. It reminds me of one of the great Azhari scholars. I see an Azhari sheikh here, mashallah, who's come all the way from the Muslim equivalent of Oxford University, of Al-Azhar University. And there's a very, very famous Azhar scholar in Egypt in the 19th century who went to the West, and he said, ذهبت إلى غرب فوجدت إسلام بغير مسلمين. I went to the West and I discovered Islam, meaning the beautiful values of the religion of Islam, but I do not see any Muslims. ورجعت إلى مصر or إلى الشرق. I went back home to the East, and فوجدت مسلمين بغير Islam. I can see Muslims, but I don't see Islam being practiced. So this is one of those ironies that in Muslim societies we have to pay zakat, but the companies don't really pay zakat, Whereas in the West, it's not an obligation to do CSR, but almost every company that we know actually have a CSR program. It's something that we need to be, have insaf, as the Malays say. But by the way, this is a saying not of, at least as far as in my humble opinion and in my research, this is a saying that's always attributed to the great Sheikh al-Azhar of 1905, who died in 1905, Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, But I've asked many of the ulama of Azhar, and I asked, where did he actually write this? No one has found it. So one could say that this is a apocryphal, a mawdu' saying of Shaykh Abdul. The ulama who are here will understand. But I found myself, and the ulama here will perhaps appreciate this, from the book Al-Ibris, the kitab of Imam Rifa' Tahtawi, who was sent by Muhammad Ali Pasha to Paris in 1825. And he wrote this in his autobiography, what he wrote, that I found the values of Islam practiced in the West even when there are no Muslims there. So it's a reminder really for, in this case, Muslims to go back home, go back to basics. They have kind of lost their fundamental values there. So very interesting question. Well, thank you, very much for that. Finally, we'll ask the final question that I think indeed, indeed, so I see Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, I think, the last. Yes,
my name is Sohaimi. I'm not from the medical world, and what more being a dean of a medical school. Anyway, I have specific questions on vaccine itself. One thing is, like any medicine, new medicine, the long-term effect of it. And I think this is a big question mark among the people of the world. Now, we know for the fact that people are not easy. What more pushing for new, more boosters, and from the aspect of AstraZeneca, I'm not sure what happens to AstraZeneca. They're not pushing for any new boosters as well. Maybe you can give us an update on that. My second question pertains to the minority of people who doesn't take vaccine at all. And they claim until today, look, I was not vaccinated, I'm still okay. Yes, I got a few days of flu, and yet I'm okay, so why is there a need for vaccine? Now, thirdly is a long one. There's a new variant coming up from UK, and perhaps you can throw some light into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, the theologian will have to say, we have to interpret that question because it wasn't very clear, which is what happens, but
yes,
go ahead.
Apologies, and jet lag is setting in. So I think the question is around the long-term effects of the vaccine and around the safety, and also that you haven't had a vaccine and you're fine.
Right.
So congratulations, I'm very happy that you haven't had a vaccine and you're fine. Unfortunately, that has not been the case for many, many millions of people around the world. And many millions of people have died because of this disease. The vaccine programs that were developed and pushed through, and I will speak to the one that I was involved in, the Oxford AstraZeneca, all the normal safety and testing that you would do for a vaccine program that is done in 5 or 10 years was done at speed in 11 months plus. And we continue to follow up and monitor individuals, and that's ongoing. We're still looking at post-licensure, we're looking at the safety of these vaccines. The reason that we were able to do that in 11 months is because we took a risk. And the risk that we took was a financial risk. Normally when you develop a vaccine, and sorry, I'm getting a bit technical here, but this is a question that I get quite frequently about how can I be sure that these vaccines are as safe as we say they are. Normally when you do a vaccine, you do it step by step, and you take pauses in between. And normally you take those pauses, particularly as an academic, because you don't have the money to go from one step to the next step. And you need to keep trying to find that money, writing grants, trying to find partnerships. If you were to run those steps concurrently, the risk that you take is financial. So one of the biggest investments you'll make when you're making a vaccine is the manufacture of the vaccine. The first manufacture will take between $1 million to 1.5 million UK pounds. And we started that without even knowing that the vaccine would make an immune response. And we also scaled up the manufacture to make enough doses to have an impact in the UK and globally before we knew the vaccine was effective. So that is the risk that we took. But the safety of your volunteers is first and foremost always in your mind when you're doing this type of work. And we didn't negate or forget that at any point. I'm sorry, the second question.
I think that's very sufficient,
Okay.
actually. In fact, well, thank you, Tess. I think it's a very, very good message for those of us who are afflicted with vaccine hesitancy out there. And I think it's a very useful kind of reminder. Although the pandemic has been declared over by the WHO, we must never be complacent and always have shukr and be grateful that we've come out of it alive, alhamdulillah. Well, now the final question then to Her Excellency the British High Commissioner Designate, Elsa, who actually, if I may announce it here, Your Excellency, she's also actually an Oxford person. So it's interesting that we've had His Royal Highness, the Sultan, who is an Oxford man, with an Oxford tutorial here with the two professors here, and inshallah, it's as the Malay say, manusia or kita merancang, Tuhan menentukannya. The Arab say, al-insanu yudabbiru wallahu yuqaddiru. Man or mankind or human beings, men and women proposes, God disposes. That we end the special seminar with an Oxford end. So from beginning to the middle to the end. Your Excellency.
Terima kasih dan tanya untuk buku Anda. And also welcome to TESS. My name is Elsa Terry and I'm the new British High Commissioner Designate here to Malaysia. His Royal Highness made some very interesting points about artificial intelligence, which I think sounds lovely in Bahasa. I think it's kecerdasan buatan, which I think is a lovely way of putting it. Are you just able briefly to give your thoughts? I can't kind of sit here and see preeminent experts in your fields. Just give some thoughts about the role of AI and how faith and medicine might interact with something that is so important and is being discussed, including in the UK at our summit in the autumn. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. This is a big question for the two of us. I'll get you to start off. I mean, can AI replace scientists in this case?
I think it can in some places, and I think it probably should.
It probably should.
In some cases, yes. I'm excited about the types of things that AI can do. I think at the moment, if you look at our healthcare system within the UK, the NHS, we have so much data there that could be put to good, that could help both mine for new therapeutics, new treatments, and better outcomes for patients. Do I think we'll ever be in a place where an elderly or a sick person will want or will not want a physician's hand or help? No. There will always be a place for medical intervention. But I think when we have so much raw resource that we really should invest in looking into that and making a better outcome for some of our most sick patients. So I am excited about it. I think it has to be done very carefully. We shouldn't rush into it. I think the ethics around who owns the data and the benefit to patients needs to be considered. But yes, no, I'm not worried about being out of a job. I'm quite happy to have less work, to be honest.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Well, actually, I would echo, Your Excellency, what Tess is saying here, because I'm again reminded of what Al-Ghazali said about tools, instruments. And he said, and he used the term al-mal, duit, money actually. Al-malu fihi sumun naqi wa tiryakun nafi, which is a very interesting statement by this great theologian. And he used the Greek here, tiryakun nafi, which in Greek means therapy, by the way. So in a tool like money, like even AI, it has both things. One, a useful antidote, therapeutic, tiryakun nafi, or a deadly poison. So this is where I come in as the theologian, and as not just a theologian, as a believer, right? As someone who believes that there is this alien world that religious people talk about, that we all have consciousness, we all are unique. You can read Carl Sagan's, science fiction story about contact, and I think they've even made a Hollywood movie about it. I mean, you can touch your soul when you watch that movie, Contact. I forgot who acted in it. Jodie Foster, I think, back in the 90s. And it's the human being whom at least Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, all people of faith believe that we all have something unique. And that uniqueness is the bit that can distinguish between a tool like AI that can be a deadly poison or, as Tess said, a useful antidote. So we should not dismiss any AI out of hand. But at the same time, nor should we fully, blindly follow or make taqlid of uncritically and swallow lock, stock and barrel. And then this is where we, the religious side, can now become critical. As scientists can become critical of religion. And it's a beautiful symmetry, creative tension. Well, what a wonderful way to end this wonderful Oxford tutorial, if I may say, that we had this conversation. And I hope those of you who've never had that experience in Oxford, that at least through this live presentation, you can see how, through an honest conversation, you can actually learn a lot just by having a chat. Just by having a chat, just by having a conversation, you can learn. And that reminds me of one of the great sayings of a great Muslim Sufi, by the way, who founded a very famous, in the Muslim Sufi tradition, there are many, many schools, many orders, like you've heard of Mevlana Rumi, you know. And this is the founder of the Naqshbandi tradition, called Shah Naqshband, another major Sufi tradition that was basically the bedrock of the Ottoman Empire for more than 600 years, the last Muslim caliphate, really. Almost every single Ottoman Khalifa and Sultan belonged to this Sufi order. And the founder of this school basically said, طريقاتنا الصحبة والخير في الجماعة. Our path is one of fellowship, suhbah, like this tutorial, this companionship, this exchange, and doing things collectively, doing good things collectively. And if I may say so, Tess, this is the very philosophy of Oxford, actually. The very, very philosophy of our great university. That our way is one of fellowship, tutorial, having that relationship between two scholars. We don't even see a tutor and a student, really, because the tutor treats the student as a scholar as well, and speak as equal. But to do good collectively as well. So with that, I end this special forum on Islam and biomedicine, and we normally end tests with asking God to benefit, and may this forum be beneficial to all of us. Amen. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Ampun tuanku, this ends this special forum. What a wonderful and robust discussion. Thank you, Dato Dr Afifi, and thank you very much, Professor Lam, for joining us and magically transporting us into the annals of Oxford through the Oxford tutorial style conversation. Also, just to add a little note, ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful music that you are hearing accompanying all movement within the hall is also a composition of Dato Dr Afifi himself. Ampun Tuanku, Patik would like to now invite Professor Dato Dr Osman Bakar, Chair of Al-Ghazali at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, to give us the vote of thanks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And good morning. Your Royal Highness, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It has been such an honor to be a part of this wonderful Royal Book Launch. On behalf of the IIUM community, particularly students and staff of ISTAC, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guests. A special thanks to you, Your Royal Highness, for your gracious presence at this special event, your precious support for the Royal Book Launch, and your inspiring royal address, which all testify to your high, well-known standing as a scholar, as a lover and patron, royal patron of learning. The much admired standing of your Royal Highness in this respect sends a strong message to all Malaysians and to the whole Ummah worldwide. There is the message of the great importance of patronization of learning, especially for our times. As a student of the history of Islamic civilization, I'm quite aware of patronization of learning as one of the most important enabling factors for the rise of the golden age of Islamic civilization. There was a time when caliphs, sultans, princes, ministers, and businessmen spent much of their time and wealth in patronizing learning, including founding the oldest universities of learning, the universities in the world. And patrons were found among both sexes. The first patron of learning in Islam, and indeed the exemplar for future patrons for knowledge and wisdom, is none other than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. We Malaysians are fortunate to have Your Royal Highness keeping alive this prophetic tradition at a time when we are very much in need of it. Next, as a fellow academic, I would like to sincerely thank Dato Dr Afifi for having published an excellent work on a subject that is of great importance. Royal Highness has already beautifully summarized the content of the book. I believe that this excellent book of 13 chapters will benefit many groups of people in the academia and in the world of Islamic scholarship. My heartiest congratulations to you, Dr. Afifi, and thank you very much for inviting me to contribute a chapter to the book. At the time when I accepted the invitation, I was not sure yet what topic I'd be writing, but in my mind, I've been much thinking about the issue of synthesis of ideas. I'm very much aware that there's a rich legacy of ideas from Islamic civilization, at least in terms of the theological and philosophical foundation. But the modern West has added so much new, hundreds of years of discoveries that Muslims lack. So it is very important for our times in this 21st century to come to a grand synthesis of ideas. The West needs words, needs ideas that can synthesize their rich discoveries. The Muslim legacy, the Muslim world, need to come to terms with all these new ideas. I believe, strongly believe, Your Royal Highness, I strongly believe that a grand synthesis is awaiting humanity, and Islam is in a position to contribute to that grand synthesis. Let me remind ourselves that Islam is traditionally known as the religion of synthesis. The reason of existence of Islam, the raison d'être of Islam, is synthesis of ideas as much as synthesis of religious teachings and ethical teachings. It is to your credit, Dr. Afifi, that notwithstanding the broad topical issues covered in the book, and your fellow editor, Dr. Asim Padala, you have succeeded in coming up with a well-organized, well-structured book. And I would say further that you have got the right epistemological perspectives in organizing the rich material in your book. It is my hope that the book will invite reviews and critics from various sectors of academia and the public. I want to share with you, since when your fellow editor, Dr. Padilla, was here recently, I asked, has any good book review appeared? He said, you're not sure yet, but I'm sure as I'm speaking now, there may be already reviews, but I want to share this. A PhD student of ours at ISTAC, who is doing his second PhD, he is trained in microbiology. Now he wants to do a second PhD dealing with the integration of microbiology and Tawheed, theology. He wrote a very, very good review, critical but sympathetic and respectful. I'm sure you like it. The student probably is here in this hall. Last but not least, I would like to express my gratitude to the important people and organizations who have helped in one way or another in making the Royal Book launch this morning a successful and memorable one. First, to officials from Istana Perak. Second, our distinguished guests. Third, to Professor Dr. Azlan from the Jennifer Institute, University of Oxford, the President of IIUM and members of its Board of Governors, Rector of IIUM and members of the University Management and other officers of the University, particularly Professor Dato Dr Ahmad Hafiz Zulkifli, Deputy Rector of Research and Innovation, who chaired the main organizing committee of the Royal Book launch and the Islam and Biomedicine Symposium to be held this afternoon. And the main organizers of the event, namely Kuala of Medicine, IIUM in Kuantan, Faculty of Medicine, University of Malaya, and University Kuala Lumpur, Royal College of Medicine, Perak, and Professor Abdul Aziz Bargood, Dean of ISTAC, and students and staff. Please join me in giving a big applause to these wonderful people and organizations for their contributions. Thank you. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam and thank you. We'd like to express our sincerest thanks to Dato Osman Baka for those kind words. Ampun Tuanku, to end this beautiful and historic event, Pathet would like to invite Sheikh Ahmad Al-Azhari, a renowned Egyptian ulama who has flown all the way to Malaysia from the famous Taba Foundation of Habib Ali, headquartered in Egypt, to recite the dua and prayers for us this morning.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي أبدع الخلق وأعاد ورفع الحق وأشاد وقمع الباطل وأباد وأظهر الإسلام وأفاد وشرع الأحكام كما أراد وبعث سيدنا محمداً وأساد ووعد له مقام الشفاعة يوم يجازى العباد. صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه الذين أزاحوا عن الأرض الفساد وبثوا فيها الرشاد. أما بعد، اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها أعلى الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. O Allah, the Lord of all worlds, we gather here today in celebration of knowledge and wisdom. We seek your blessings and guidance as we embark on this auspicious occasion. We ask you to shower your mercy upon us, grant us success in our endeavors, and bless this book launch event with enormous benefits and inspiration. O Allah, we humbly beseech you to bless His Majesty Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, Ibni Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah Al-Maghfur-Lah, the Sultan of Perak, Malaysia. Grant him good health, wisdom, and prosperity. Bestow upon him your divine guidance and protection as he leads his people with justice and righteousness. May his reign be a source of tranquility and progress for the state and its people. And may his leadership be a source of stability, progress, and unity. O Allah, indeed you have entrusted your servant with a heavy responsibility that weighs down mountains, and the accountability upon him is immense. O Allah, inspire him with perfect guidance and grant him success in truth, justice, and kindness. O Allah, we beseech you to bestow abundant rewards upon him for his efforts, both in this worldly life and in the hereafter. May you bless him with success and prosperity in all his endeavors, and may his actions be a means of attaining your pleasure and nearness. Grant him the fruits of his labor in this world and in the hereafter. Grant him eternal bliss and the highest ranks of paradise. O Allah, accept his striving and make it a source of continuous blessings and rewards. O Allah, we beseech you to bless your servant, Dato Dr Afifi al-Akiti, on the occasion of his book launch. O Allah, grant him continued success in his scholarly pursuits. Inspire him with wisdom and knowledge, and bless his work to be a source of guidance and enlightenment for all those who read it. O Allah, protect him from fitna and slander from the evil people of this world. O Allah, we humbly implore you to shower your bountiful rewards upon him, both in this transient world and in the everlasting hereafter. May his sincere efforts and endeavors be met with your divine favor and abundant blessings. Grant him success and prosperity in every facet of his life, and may his actions be a means of attaining eternal happiness and salvation. O Allah, encompass him with your mercy and protection, and grant him the ultimate reward of his unwavering dedication and righteous deeds. May his striving be a source of perpetual blessings and an everlasting testimony to your boundless generosity. O Allah, bless all the attendees of this event. Grant them knowledge that benefits and wisdom that enlightens. Guide us all to the path of righteousness and unity. Make this gathering a means of fostering harmony, understanding, and respect among people of different backgrounds. O Allah, we ask you to accept our humble supplication and make this event a source of blessings for everyone present. Grant us the strength to continue seeking knowledge, using it for the betterment of ourselves, our communities, and the world at large. O Allah, we place our trust in you, for you are the bestower of blessings and the all-hearing, all-knowing. Ameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammadin alayhi salam salatan tadum wa tuhda ilayhi mamarra al-layali wa tul ad-dawam walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Ameen, Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Thank you, Sheikh Ahmed, for very moving and heartfelt prayer to end this momentous celebration. Ampun Tuanku, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the Royal Book Launch of Islam and Biomedicine. Ampun Tuanku, disembah maklumkan bahawa dengan ini sempurnalah majlis the Royal Book Launch of Islam and Biomedicine. Patik bagi pihak penganjur sekali lagi merafak sembah, menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih di atas limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku sudi bercemaduli berangkat ke majlis pada hari ini, dan patik mohon limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk mengakhirinya. Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku akan disembah silakan untuk ke sesi lawatan dan seterusnya ke majlis resepsi dan santapan. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridzuan diiringi dev-dev kenamaan.